In chapter 2 of The Innovator's Dilemma, Clayton Christensen talks about the value networks and the impetus to innovate. I want to contrast this to Jim McKelvey's statement that innovation is not a choice, it's a necessity, and the process of building an innovation stack. I want to contrast these two thoughts and tie them together into case studies such as Tesla, Intel, and Square. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's November 7th, 2020. This is Krim Delko. It's a Saturday. There's no update today. Chapter 2 of The Innovator's Dilemma talks about the value network and the impetus to innovate. In this chapter, Christensen elaborates further on his concept that top companies fail to see new entrants, disruptive technologies, because they focus on their best customers and they particularly allocate resources to the best, highest margin products, and therefore miss these new emerging markets that initially might have lower margins because they attack completely different markets. And then over time, when those supposedly lower margin markets get better and better through sustained innovation, over time, they start entering into the traditional market and therefore disrupt the incumbents. And this is how successful companies can fail. Christensen talks about the disk drive industry and explains how disk drive manufacturers with smaller disk drives, such as 3.5, 1.8 inch disk drives, were able to penetrate into desktop and mainframe markets because over time they were able to improve through sustained innovation and penetrate those markets. So here are the dynamics. We start with a market. Let's use the disk drive market like Christensen, and you're selling to mainframe manufacturers such as IBM. So you're Seagate, you're selling to IBM. The mainframe market has certain characteristics, and the main one is that they need more and more storage capacity per dollar. This is what they care about the most. They don't care about power consumption, they don't care about weight, size, things like that. They are focused on how many megabytes can I store per dollar. This is what I care about because all the other things such as power consumption, space, they're not a constraint. And then you have an innovation, the 5-inch or the 1.8 inch. You have smaller disk drives. And the smaller disk drives, they have different characteristics. They are less power consuming and they are particularly less heavy, and they can do certain things for certain customers that the bigger drives can't do. For example, they can be used for mini computers and laptops. So you have this dynamic now where the marketing people at Seagate, they talk to their largest customers and they say, hey guys, we have this new innovation, are you interested? But because you're already talking to a customer that for years has been consuming mainframes, he doesn't care about these smaller form factors because that's not his market. So, and what he says actually, what Christensen says, often these innovations come from within the incumbent. So Seagate engineers developed these smaller form factors, sometimes just out of, fun and things like that. And what's interesting is though they don't use them. They don't actually innovate because they don't have a need. The margins are in the mainframe market. The margins are not in the laptop market. So what happens then is that other entrants, sometimes even engineers that worked for Seagate and developed that market, they get out. They say, well, we're not interested in working for this large company anymore. We want to develop our own technology with this new innovation. They start entering this new market and they find new customers, and lo and behold, there's the laptop industry is born, and you have this 3.5 inch disk drives which start flourishing. What's even worse for the incumbent now, these 3.5 inch disk drives, which initially are used just for this new emerging market called laptop, they start doing really well also in the mainframe market because they, through sustained innovation, become better and better and better. And the costs come down, and then there's other advantages such as weight and power consumption. And then all of a sudden, these big drives are not interesting anymore. And there you have it. That is the disruption that Christensen talks about. So the incumbents not just miss out on this new market, they even get disrupted from below. So from this initially lower performing technology, they start getting disrupted because that lower performing technology through sustained innovation starts getting better and better. Now, this is the Christensen worldview, of the 1990s. Jim McKelvey writes a little bit of a different story. He says innovation is a necessity, not a choice. So, and he doesn't say, look, these disruptive innovations, they happen because some engineers tinker around and come up with new solutions that then happen somehow by luck, also create new markets. McKelvey is much more deterministic in a sense that he says, look, I have a certain idea, something I want to do, and I need to innovate because there's nothing off the shelf. So he wants to enable payments for grocery markets and artists and things like that, small credit card payments. That's where Square started. And they needed to innovate. They needed to create technology. They needed to innovate. They needed to create the innovation stack to actually make this technology work. So it's a much more deterministic view versus this, I would say, more probabilistic view of Christensen. Christensen did his work in the 80s and 90s, and he looked at the industries such as this graph. He looked at other industries too. We'll talk about this in chapter 3 when he talks about the earth excavation industry. But nevertheless, he has a bit of a less of a deterministic view. I think McKelvey is much more in the tradition of 0 to 1 and the beginning of infinity, where he's deterministic. He's, look, I have a view, I'm optimistic, I can solve this problem. And the problem is, it could be just payments accepted by artists. Or it could be a much bigger mission, such as Elon Musk's mission, I want to go to Mars. Or it could be maybe something along the lines of Square again. I want to empower more and more people, give them financial services. For that, I need to innovate. I need to create new markets, new technologies to enable people that in prior years didn't have access to financial services. I want to give them financial services. So, for example, I need to find cheaper ways to transfer money from A to B. Cryptocurrency is one option. I need to find better risk management tools. Machine learning could help there. So, algorithmic risk management, for example, where you don't just use statistics, but you actually implement algorithms in your day-to-day business and then use those algorithms to also price insurance. So it's more of an integrated business, a little bit like Tesla, like I discussed in one of my previous episodes, where Tesla is building an algorithmic insurance business. So this is not just insurance a la Geico, where you look at the past, you extrapolate into the future, you incorporate your insurance algorithms, your pricing algorithms in your driving algorithms, which determine a priori how people will drive. So you have a much better grasp of how people will behave on the road, and therefore you can price your insurance product much better. This is, of course, still a conjecture. We don't know if this will succeed, but at this point, we're very positive about this particular business of Tesla. So let's get back to the contrast of Clayton Christensen and Jim McKelvey. While Jim McKelvey is very deterministic, Christensen, I would say, is more probabilistic. And this is an interesting development. It's about 25 years between Christensen and McKelvey, between those two books. One is, of course, an academic, the other is an entrepreneur. And it shows the different viewpoint of the world. Again, probabilistic, descriptive versus deterministic, and proactive and optimistic. I would also say that there's a bit of a change in the attitude, particularly in Silicon Valley, in the business community, around these types of topics. And I think it's also related to the success of Silicon Valley. In particular, companies like Square or Amazon or Tesla have shown that with a certain mission, a certain clear view of the future, you can actually build that future. And in that sense, the quote of Jim McKelvey that innovation is not a choice but a necessity makes a lot of sense. So we would consider Jim McKelvey's book a further evaluation, a further step towards a better understanding of disruptive innovation relative to Christensen's groundbreaking book, which was The Innovator's Dilemma. And I think it fits really nicely also in the Popperian viewpoint of David Deutsch, who is obviously propagating in his book, The Beginning of Infinity, how we are, in the end, humans are machines for conjecturing. So our ability to guess and work out probabilities and guess and conjecture and have those conjectures compete with within the marketplace, this is really what differentiates us from, let's say, other species. And this is exactly what's happening here. We have a conjecture by by Clayton Christensen. The conjecture is that there is there's something called a disruptive technology, which comes out often out of the incumbents, but doesn't have a market yet, and then usually through try and error finds a market. So this is more of a probabilistic, descriptive explanation of the world. And then we have this idea being tested intellectually, but also in practice through entrepreneurs that were inspired by Clayton Christensen. And that practice is being, there's a try and error, and that try and error leads to something that we call deterministic disruption, where you start with the idea that you want to change a market. You have a certain mission. So it's a mission-driven company, and it's a lot more mission-driven than in the past, where the mission becomes the actual modus operandi of the company. So the mission is not just some statement that you put on your website, but it's actually it is the fabric of your company, the fabric of your processes. It is the fabric of your culture, which is also very important. It determines the culture of the company. So this mission is embodied in the statement, innovation is not a choice, it is a necessity, because in order to achieve the mission, you have to develop those technologies. You don't have a choice. So this is a lot more deterministic. And we want to tie Tesla into this now. Tesla's mission is to accelerate the development of sustainable energy transportation. So in a nutshell, what Tesla is doing, it is trying to find ways, technologies, processes, businesses that can get to a more sustainable energy infrastructure. Tesla is not propagating regress here, so Tesla is very much in line with Jim McKelvey and also David Deutsch. Tesla is not asking for less driving or less consumption of heat or air conditioning or any of that stuff. The question is, can we find better ways to produce energy and distribute energy so we can have a more sustainable energy infrastructure? And the answer is yes, we can use photovoltaics and storage through lithium-ion batteries and put them in houses and cars, and therefore drive around with photons. Photons help us have a better energy infrastructure. We're more flexible, and we have less carbon. So in the end, what Tesla is proposing is a decarbonized energy infrastructure. This is the proposal. So it's not a call for regress, for driving less or any of that stuff that green people do, or tree huggers and all that. It is simply, in a David Deutsch sense, a better explanation of how we can use energy, particularly the sun's energy, to live on this earth in a more progressive way, create jobs and have a much better life. Anybody who buys a Tesla or owns a battery pack or has any kind of Tesla product can attest that your life is better with those products. You're not compromising, you're actually feeling better, saving money, and doing something which is decarbonizing energy infrastructure, which at least for now feels like doing the right thing. Now, how does this tie into Clayton Christensen's second chapter, where we're talking about the possibility that incumbents fail because they don't see new markets? Is this, first of all, is this a risk for Tesla? And the second question is Tesla disrupting other players? I think the second question, which we will discuss further on, has to be answered with yes. Tesla is disrupting the traditional car industry, the traditional utility industry, the oil industry. They're disrupting many industries exactly in the Clayton Christensen way, which is they're creating new markets that the others don't even see, so they don't really care about what Tesla is doing. For example, the oil industry is not in the business of delivering photovoltaics to customers, so they really didn't feel any competition, of course, until it was too late, or it is too late. That's maybe an open question if we're already at the inflection point. But it seems like that the success of Tesla and electric cars could lead to a massive decrease in demand for fossil fuels and therefore be a real disruptive threat for the oil industry. So question number 2, again, is Tesla disrupting other industries? Yes. Question number 1, can Tesla be disrupted? This question has to be answered with most likely not. But we have to be on our toes as investors, and of course Tesla management has to be on their toes, because it is absolutely paramount for Tesla to make sure that they cover the whole range of potential markets, not just the existing markets, but the potential market that surround the value networks that Tesla is in. Elon Musk has said in several speeches that he considers himself a company with roughly 12 startups or a dozen startups. What he means with that in plain English is we are trying to disrupt roughly a dozen markets and then grow innovation stacks in those markets and therefore compound the knowledge, and we could have a lot more than just 12 markets out of that. In specifically though, and we discussed that in the previous episode when we spoke about chapter 1, the question, can Tesla be disrupted in the electric car industry through the Chinese startups? Because they seem to have some of the characteristics of the Tesla, of the Clayton Christensen chapter 1 type of disruption, where you start with a low end and then creep yourself up into the high end. Is this possible? And we have answered this in episode 1. It is possible, but Tesla is answering that threat with a $25,000 car. So Tesla is attacking particularly that threat by saying we will have a $25,000 car and therefore not let anybody creep up to us. $25,000 is the threshold. We're okay with that. There's no necessity to go even further. Maybe they could even go further in the future, but for now, this is the goal. So we are, as investors, very happy about that, and we interpret this announcement by Tesla and the battery day that they want a $25,000 car, which has taken Wall Street a little bit aback. We interpret that as an answer to the threat in China, and therefore as a good thing. So to summarize, chapter 2, Clayton Christensen discusses the reason why incumbents fail to see entrants, disruptive entrants. It is a further explanation of the chapter 1 theme, which is similar, and the explanation in particular is the value network concept, which is that if you're in a specific value network where your gross margin is in specific product areas with specific customers, typically those customers don't see the disruptive technology and the necessity and the upside of that, so you're not delivering to them, and therefore you're opening up a gap for entrants, which then enter the market and have the ability through sustained innovation to creep up to your existing market and therefore disrupt you. We've also established in this episode that Tesla is doing that in several markets for other industries, and we've established that for Tesla themselves, for now we don't see that risk. In particular, the Chinese entrants are being taken care of with the $25,000 car. Thank you.